Hello, and welcome to Tech Connects, Dice's podcast where we dig into the topics on tech hiring, recruiting, and careers that matter to you. I'm your host, Nick Kolakowski, and I'm going to talk to great guests every month about the current state of the tech careers world, including the tech job market, the hottest tech skills, what companies are doing to attract and retain tech pros in a historically tight market, and much more. Our next guest is Seth Robinson, who's Vice President of Industry Research at CompTIA, the Computing Technology Industry Association. CompTIA offers education, training, certifications, and monthly research. If you read the news we regularly post on Dice's career advice website, you know we cite their research pretty consistently, including their monthly analysis of the tech unemployment rate and job trends. I wanted to talk to Seth because he recently wrote a white paper on how organizations are developing AI strategies, including what AI could mean for tech professionals both in the near and the long term. So let's listen to his key insights into AI and how it might impact your own journey through the tech industry. So you've been doing a ton at CompTIA about how the AI evolution, revolution, whatever you want to call it, is going to actually end up impacting the overall job market. And it makes me curious, there's so much chatter right now. There's so much hype around AI about how generative AI is going to impact jobs, how machine learning is going to basically take entire industries and turn them upside down and shake them and make them into something new. And so, I'm just kind of wondering, where are we in that hype cycle right now? Because there was so much hype, but you're also starting to see, Wall Street is starting to be like, where are the returns from this? Some companies are like, this actually isn't yielding the benefits we want it to yield. Where are we on the map is in simplest terms.
Mm-hmm. Last year in our Outlook study, where we try to give 10 trends for the year to come, our first trend was around AI, and we said that we think AI hype is going to fade, but that workflows are going to continue evolving. And it's certainly not much of a stretch to be predicting that a tech trend, the hype is going to fade. That it always happens, right? So you're kind of guaranteed success on that. But I think that even putting that out there and kind of saying that was our way of saying this is naturally going to happen. And it's probably going to happen in the next 12 months. And I think we're seeing the signs of that, like you mentioned. I've been at CompTIA for about 13 years now, and I've seen a few tech cycles. And this is one of the most pronounced ones we've seen in a long time. But it's following some of the same patterns, right? Where there's all this initial enthusiasm, a lot of imagination about how things are going to change. And I think at the end of the day, there's just such an underestimation of how complex technology stacks and technology architecture has become. And then you add into that AI really isn't even a product. It's not a new thing that's going to come in. It's usually an enabling layer of a lot of other tools and technologies, right? And so I think there's a lot of learning that needs to happen, to kind of shift from some of the gee whiz things that people have, kind of been seeing and playing with that are almost more consumer applications into how does that actually play out in an enterprise workflow. And the second half of that prediction from us, I think, is really important too. We do believe that workflows are going to change pretty dramatically. It's just going to take a while. And I think it's going to be a slower, longer change than people are expecting, but still maybe very impactful, and it will have a pretty dramatic impact on skills.
It seems pretty or not necessarily surprising to you or surprising to analysts who are watching this space, but when you read quotes from executives and so on, they almost seem surprised that after sort of adopting a lot of these tools and frameworks into their team's workflow, how 90% of the job is still reliant on human skills and so on. I think some executives thought this was going to be sort of like an instant shift. 100% could be covered by ChatGPT. And then all of a sudden they're like, oh no, only 5 to 10% is covered by this tool. And we still need humans to do all the messy things. So that's been interesting in terms of that expectations reset on the part of some companies and some people too.
Right. And I think that generative AI, was a little bit of smoke and mirrors for people that haven't been paying attention to what a CIO is trying to do, for the past, 5 to 10 years, because you see all these stories come out of companies saying, we are using AI to do this process, expense processing or HR or whatever it is. And they they don't necessarily define it, or maybe the reporter that's doing that story doesn't ask them to define it. And I think for those of us that have been watching the industry, you kind of look under the covers and you think, this isn't something that they started in late 2022. They've been using AI, whether that's natural language processing or machine learning algorithms. They've been using that for a while. And now you've got generative AI, which does a different thing than those other algorithms do. And they are weaving that in. But when they give AI use cases, these are things that have been in the works for a long time, right? And so I think that generative AI and the splash that it made, I think caused some confusion for people, right? In terms of the actual impact that it could make, the degree of interaction, like you've said, with other tools, and how that's going to change people's workflow. And at the end of the day, it's really amazing, but it has its own limitations, right? And so if you're trying to weave that into a complex workflow, especially if you're at a Fortune 500 company, if you're doing something, pretty high stakes, your tolerance for risk, your tolerance for mistakes is a little bit lower.
Yeah, it's interesting. On that note, I have a relative who works in fintech, and I was talking to him the other day about it. And I was asking him basically that question, like, how is generative AI impacting, and how does that sort of align with everything else in terms of tech and everything? And what he was saying, he said that, he works primarily as a quant, that his firm and that other firms like him have been using machine learning essentially since the late 90s. For all these different processes, including trades. And that it was so, by the time sort of generative AI hit, he and his team were sort of laughing, almost like people were like, oh my gosh, like AI, like this new amazing thing. And they've been, literally using it for 25 years or so. So I think it's in terms of parsing it out. People are sort of using AI as kind of this catch-all term, but it's a very different thing between generative AI tools, which are fairly new and more seemingly being spun up by startups with every passing second, versus like machine learning was just being used for decades in some cases in some industries. And I imagine that sort of sets the expectation so that, like, for example, if you do work in finance, a lot of this hype cycle is probably passing you by, maybe to a certain extent, versus like if you're a marketing firm that's learning about generative AI for the first time, you're probably very hyped up and excited. The hype is probably not equal across all industries, I imagine, as well.
I think that's a great example. Yeah, and a great way to put it, that, people that have been working with it for a while, they understand some of the limitations. To me, the biggest limitation is all of the AI algorithms work on probability. And that's so that they produce these things that maybe we would have never thought of. And that's how you get those amazing results, but they also can produce mistakes. And so you're never going to be able to completely tune out the mistakes, because then you'd be doing something that's just a pure software program, right? You put in the same input and you get the same output every time. To get those amazing outputs, you've got to have that probability baked in, and then that means you're going to have some possibility of a wild error, right? And the people that have been working with it for 20 years, they understand that, right? And the people that haven't been working with it until 2022, they don't understand that, and so they're learning that. And in addition, there are pretty significant costs. A lot of people obviously aren't going to be building their own LLM or building even their own algorithms, but they're going to be leveraging other people's, and those people have to incur pretty significant costs. And so those costs are going to get passed on. And none of this is free, right? So again, I think people that have been working in it a while, they kind of understand, I think, some of those limitations, some of the total cost of ownership. And people that are a little bit new to it, or people that haven't been working with technology, if they're more on the business side, these are things that they have to learn.
Oh yeah, no, absolutely. Do you think in terms of the productivity gains from AI and like kind of the speed to adoption, do you think some industries are based on what you've seen are doing better at it in terms of it versus others, or do you think everyone's sort of feeling their way in the dark on this to a certain extent?
Yeah, I'm not sure if I would go industry by industry, but I think there are segments, right? And so I think you take like software programming as an example, right? And whether you'd want to call that an industry or a job role or whatever it is, software programming, it's a pretty huge part of the economy. And I think they are definitely seeing some relatively, near-term gains in productivity, changes to their workflow, things that they're going to do differently. I think that transformation is happening pretty quickly. I think, other transformations are going to take a while. So if you're thinking that you're going to use AI as an HR professional to help screen candidates, to help, get you through the recruitment process faster, you're probably going to run into some of those limitations, some of those challenges that we talked about earlier. And there's probably going to be a little bit more of a learning curve, right? And when you go, industry by industry, some industries have been relatively cutting edge with their use of technology. So something like retail, I think is usually pushing the envelope, whereas something like healthcare or finance or government, all of those are doing some degree of pushing the envelope versus being highly regulated, and so there's a lot more concerns that they have to watch out for. And I think everyone is kind of in the middle figuring this out, right? And I think there are some examples of really quick wins and high productivity, and I think there are some examples of where it's going to be a lot harder than people imagine it to be.
Yeah, no, I think that's definitely true. I mean, the Stack Overflow developer survey, which I think is something insane, like 70,000 respondents or something like that. One of the main obstacles that software engineers at least had to adopting AI was a sort of trust in the outputs. And those concerns will probably, I imagine, as LLMs and so on get a little bit more refined, like some of those sort of trust issues will maybe fade away. But it seems like a lot of these people within industries are still kind of feeling out like, can I actually trust this thing to a certain extent, or can I rely on this to do an output which is useful? And there are some prompts, I guess, in the case of software engineering that you can feed them where it's essentially show your work, and hopefully the LLM will spit back something that kind of demonstrates how it arrived at a particular conclusion. But I mean, it just sort of remains to be seen. One of the things that's interesting to me is there's a lot of companies that, as you were saying, like want to get into this, and they might not necessarily have the budget to hire a team of AI specialists to spin up, a custom LLM, as you were alluding to, or whatever. So they're trying to upskill their people internally, maybe not necessarily to become a off-the-shelf AI team and build an amazing LLM or do whatever you're going to do, but at least be good prompt engineers and like sort of do their jobs that way. And because you're doing such an enormous, amazing data analysis, it made me wonder, like, what skills are companies looking for when it comes to AI, whether to upskill their internal people or to hire? Because I imagine there's probably like a few key ones out there that many companies want versus like kind of highly specialized AI related stuff.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think what we're seeing is most of the skills that companies are looking for are augmenting skills that already exist. And that happens across the board. So I think that the skills question and the skills scenario is tightly tied into how companies are going to be bringing in AI. Most of the companies in our survey, the pretty wide majority of them, say they believe that AI is just going to be baked into the business applications that they're already buying, right? So rather than writing their own, rather than there being these brand new tools that they might buy, they're going to continue buying CRM, ERP, business productivity suites, whatever it is, HR software, finance software, and they're expecting that AI is going to be a layer of that. And I would say, based on, the current structure of enterprise architecture, that's a pretty reasonable assumption. So then if that's the case, what skills do you need? Well, all the people are still going to be using these tools. So the core skill still needs to be in using CRM, using a finance software, whatever it is. And then you need to have an understanding of how the AI layer is accelerating or augmenting what that tool is doing. And to your point about, being able to trust the output, I think that's one of the major skills that's going to come in is we might not ever get to a point where we expect AI to put out a perfect response every time, but that validation and evaluation of the output is going to be one of those skills that everyone has to learn. If you're using these tools, what does your feedback loop look like? You get the output and you evaluate it, and then do you make adjustments? Where do you put the energy into just making adjustments to that output, or trying to craft a better input so that you're getting the output? I think all of that learning is something that's going to happen across a lot of job roles. And then when you get into some of the more core technology professions, like especially cybersecurity and data, are two areas that we see companies expecting AI to have a big impact. So I think if you're in those fields, there's probably going to be a little bit beyond, kind of that base level of fluency. And actually, using the AI a little bit more directly in order to automate parts of your job or in order to produce better analysis or something like that.
Yeah, it seems both in the case of cybersecurity and then also in general, it seems that as much as maybe some executives who want to cut headcount may not be able to achieve this goal, but it seems that there's still this very deep need for domain expertise to like kind of look at the output and evaluate whether it's going to work out for you and kind of like analyze the work the AI is doing and judge whether it's good. And then in cybersecurity, obviously, I imagine a lot of cybersecurity experts are probably sweating over like the implications of bringing AI into the tech stack. And your report goes into cybersecurity to a pretty deep extent. I'm just wondering, what exactly are cybersecurity experts fearing from AI, or not? Maybe fear is too strong a term. Like what's giving them concern as companies are kind of rushing in and integrating all this stuff into the tech stack?
Cybersecurity is kind of a unique field because they've got worries on two sides, right? One, they're worried about what kind of new AI enabled attacks do we have to start defending against, and then on the other side, they're saying how can we use AI internally to improve our defenses or automate our processes or whatever it is. So they've got that external part that they have to worry about and really be concerned about. And I think when you ask, what do they possibly fear, I think that's the greater fear or concern for them, because cybersecurity is already in a position of having a pretty broad and diverse threat landscape, and kind of having constrained resources or constrained funds to defend against every one of these things. A lot of companies are doing a lot more risk analysis because they know that there can't be perfect cybersecurity, but you don't want a major breach to happen or a major incident to happen. And AI, as much as it's going to accelerate productivity, for companies that are producing viable output, it's going to accelerate, the bad actors and their ability to produce attacks as well. So I think that's what cybersecurity professionals are trying to balance is, how do we grow our awareness of the new threats that are going to come, and how do we use AI internally to combat those threats, to do our processes better, and to just learn about this technology a little bit more.
I have a contact who belongs on the red team of a pretty large tech company, and I was bringing this up with him the other day, actually after reading the CompTIA report. And I asked him, like, just flat out, like, not necessarily what keeps you up at night, but like, what do you see as sort of like the nightmare scenario within your org? And he said, deep fake social engineering, where like just the bad actor replicates like a CEO or like the head of a team, and then like makes a video call and then convinces the person to buy $500 worth of gift cards and send the numbers or something like that. But I mean, it's when you start thinking about where cybersecurity was 10 or 15 years ago and the threats that they faced, which were enormous back then, and then you think about the Pandora's box that could open with this on that side, it almost strikes me as a sort of thing where it's cybersecurity experts are fearful of what AI could potentially unleash, but then also you're hoping that these AI tools will sort of meet that threat, where some sort of AI detector for deepfakes presents that red team guy's scenario from ever coming to life. So it's interesting in terms of like giveth and taketh away, in terms of like what AI can potentially do.
Right. And I think the nightmare scenario that you're describing is so terrifying because it's preying on the thing that's always been problematic for cybersecurity, which is human error, right? There's not going to be a technology tool that can necessarily get in the way of this thing. You're relying on someone's judgment. You're relying on somebody's awareness of what to check for if they get this video call or if they get an email. And cybersecurity professionals, again, have been fighting that battle for quite a while now, and that's only going to accelerate when there are these new tools coming into the environment.
Yeah. You're in terms of, I mean, taking it out from cybersecurity back to kind of like broader AI implementation. Your report also mentioned that companies needed a balanced strategy when it came to kind of integrating AI into the tech stack, and it made me wonder. I mean, that's a huge, complicated question, but what do companies need to think about, especially if they're totally new to this, when it comes to like both the data sets that they're going to be using to kind of build custom AIs, just work with the technology in general? And then on the other side of it, kind of what outputs should they expect from the process? I mean, it just seems like I realize that's huge and I'm sorry, but I'm trying to, any person who's listening to this who kind of wants to build out AI, I kind of want to give them an expectations of kind of how they should basically strategize for this, because there's a lot of hype out there. There's a lot of sense of people aren't quite sure what to expect from this. So I just wanted to get your take on that.
Yeah, I think the data part is really huge for a lot of companies. As long as we've been looking at data, going back to the big data trend, or maybe even before that, what we see is that companies definitely want to do a lot more analysis. Now they want to be using data as input for training to AI programs. And they haven't necessarily built some of these foundational data practices that they need to build, right? And so having robust practices around data management, database administration, data cleaning, all of those things that would produce a comprehensive and cohesive set of data that you can then analyze or use as input. I think that's a huge challenge for companies right now, right? And that it's definitely a prerequisite to getting the most value out of AI. You're only going to get minimal value out of AI if you're using general data or if the tool hasn't been trained well. You still might be able to get something out of that, but the most productivity is going to come when you're using the right data to frame the question and do the analysis. So we see data as being one of the big hurdles that companies have to clear on their pathway to making AI more productive for them and really transforming, those workflows. And then on the output side, we've talked about it a little bit, but I think there has to be that growing awareness that the outputs can sometimes highlight really unique and innovative insights and sometimes be completely wrong, right? And so what does the workflow look like if you have to be adding in some evaluation of that? It's not going to come for free, like we've already said. And so I think that's going to be a piece of the puzzle for a long time. And I don't believe that it's necessarily a strong strategy to just assume that the technology is going to get better, and that the percentage of innovative insights compared to mistakes is just going to improve over time. It probably will, but you don't want to put yourself at risk of that serious mistake that you then bank a decision on, or that mistake is then going into deeper analysis, right? So I think being aware of how these tools work and where they are offering input, and then what you do with the human element that's working with these tools and what you do with your workflow, I think that's something that companies really have to consider pretty strongly. Again, that's something that we've seen be a challenge for a lot of companies, is trying to change their behavior rather than just inserting a new product.
Yeah, and I imagine you brought it up, and it's something that doesn't often come up in AI discussions, at least with me. Although I imagine within corporate boardrooms, it's probably agenda item number one, which is how should companies actually think about budgeting for AI? Because that's something too where sure, there's tons of free tools out there. There's like your enterprise subscription to ChatGPT, but I imagine that's also an area where companies they haven't quite wrapped their head around like how much money do I need to reserve in like 2025 for this thing. I guess it depends on their needs, but there might be, I don't know if you have advice on that front in terms of how to think about it.
Yeah, I think this gets back to the way that AI is going to be incorporated in a business. So I don't think you're going to have an AI line item, much in the same way that it's not a perfect correlation, but a lot of companies don't necessarily have. They may have a cybersecurity line item, and that's for we're upgrading the firewall, we're buying this technology, but cybersecurity is woven throughout many of the other line items in the budget, right? And I think it will be similar for AI, right? So maybe you would have some AI specific activities. Maybe that would be around evaluation of different vendors, or evaluation of products, or evaluation of data that needs to be used. But in a lot of cases, then the AI budget or the AI effort is going to be incorporated into other efforts. So we're building out a new CRM system. We're building out a new ERP. We're integrating a new finance piece of software, and there's going to be AI as part of that. And so it becomes a question of trade-offs, and this is where when we talk more and more about strategic technology, we talk about the need to collaborate and have everybody at the table. And it's not just the business side defining things, and then it gets thrown over to the technology side. I think everyone has to be at the table speaking the same language, and so that there's learning on both sides. and then the ability to make the trade-offs, around, cost, function, security, data, all of these things. We keep saying, it's not as simple as just buying a product. There are a lot of moving pieces, I think, with AI. And there are a lot of different people throughout an organization that understand each of those individual pieces. And so it has to be a collaborative effort.
Yeah, no, man, hopefully companies figure it out. And that's it, folks. There's a lot of chatter right now about all things AI related, so it's great to step back and take a broader view on the technology and the industries it impacts. Here are some additional takeaways from our conversation. First, the AI hype train, it's slowing down a little bit. It's essential to recognize that while AI has the potential to revolutionize industries, it's not a magic solution. Rather, it's a tool that can augment existing workflows and processes. Understanding that distinction is crucial for setting realistic expectations and avoiding overhyped promises when it comes to AI. Second, effective AI implementation hinges on robust data management. Companies need to prioritize data cleaning, organization, and analysis to maximize the value of the AI tools that they purchase. Additionally, core skills in areas like software programming, cybersecurity, and data analysis remain essential. AI is often integrated into existing tools and platforms, so proficiency in these areas is vital. Third, as AI becomes more prevalent, the ability to critically evaluate AI outputs will be increasingly important. Professionals need to develop skills to assess the reliability and accuracy of AI-generated information. This includes understanding the limitations of AI algorithms and the potential for errors. Fourth, successful AI integration requires collaboration across different departments and roles. Technology and business teams must work together to define goals, identify challenges, and allocate resources efficiently. A holistic approach that considers the interplay of people, processes, and technology is essential for maximizing the benefits of AI. Keeping these points in mind will help you and your company use AI more effectively. We've covered quite a bit in this episode, so give it another listen if there was anything you missed. We'll see you next time, and remember, Dice is your best resource to find the tech talent you need to fill your open roles, and for tech professionals, the best place to grow your tech career.